The inheritance check sat on my kitchen counter, mocking me with its emptiness. $300,000 gone, not stolen by a stranger or lost to some elaborate scam, but swindled away by my own sister. I'm Samantha Cole, and until yesterday, I thought I knew what family meant, thought I understood the bonds that were supposed to hold us together through everything life could throw at us. But apparently, blood means nothing when money is involved and ambition overrides conscience. I stared at that empty envelope for what felt like hours, my hands shaking as I read the bank statement again and again, hoping somehow the numbers would change, and this would all turn out to be some terrible nightmare I could wake up from. But the reality was there in black and white, cold and undeniable. Harper had forged my signature, convinced the executor she was me, and transferred every single penny of Aunt Caroline's inheritance into her own account while I was working double shifts trying to keep my head above water and finish my architecture degree. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You can't just take what was meant for me. My voice cracked as I confronted Harper in our childhood home's living room later that afternoon. The same room where we'd played together as children and promised each other we'd always be best friends, no matter what happened in the world outside these walls. She sat there perfectly composed in her designer outfit, probably bought with my money, examining her manicured nails with the kind of casual indifference that made my blood boil and my heart break at the same time. "The will didn't specify you," she said coolly, not even bothering to look up from her inspection of her perfectly polished fingernails. "Aunt Caroline left it to her beloved niece. I'm her niece too, you know." "She meant me," I said, my voice rising with frustration and disbelief at Harper's audacity. "I was the one who visited her every weekend when she got sick. I was the one who drove her to medical appointments and sat with her during chemotherapy sessions. I was the one who held her hand when she was scared and listened to her stories about the old days and made sure she wasn't alone during the worst time of her life." I was the perfect niece? Harper's eyes flashed with something that might have been jealousy or resentment. "Some of us had to work, Samantha. We can't all spend our time playing favorite with rich relatives and hoping for handouts instead of building actual careers." The irony of her words hit like a physical slap across my face, because while I'd been working 2 jobs to pay for school and taking care of Aunt Caroline, Harper had been hopping between marketing positions and living off our parents' generosity, maxing out their credit cards for shopping sprees and weekend trips she posted about constantly on social media. "Working," I laughed bitterly, this sound echoing off the walls of our childhood home. "Is that what you call maxing out mom and dad's credit cards and getting fired from 3 jobs in 2 years? The front door opened before Harper could respond, and Maggie Green stepped into the room with the kind of concerned urgency that told me she'd dropped everything to come here when I called her in desperation. Maggie had been my mentor at the architecture firm where I'd been interning, a woman whose wisdom and experience had guided me through some of the darkest moments of my academic career, and seeing her now felt like having cavalry arrived just when I thought all hope was lost. "Samantha," she looked between us with her experienced eyes, taking in the scene, understanding immediately that this was more than just about family drama. "I came as soon as I could after getting your call." Harper straightened in her chair, smoothing her expensive skirt with movements that were probably calculated to look casual but came across as defensive. "Family," she said with the kind of fake politeness she'd perfected over the years, the tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable while being completely unreasonable. "Family?" I grabbed the empty inheritance check from the coffee table, my hands trembling with rage and betrayal. "You forged my signature, Harper. You convinced the executor you were me and stole $300,000 that Aunt Caroline specifically meant for me to use for my education and career." Maggie's sharp intake of breath cut through the tension in the room like a knife. "That's a serious accusation, Samantha. Forgery and identity theft are federal crimes." "It's also unprovable." Harper stood up with fluid grace, smoothing her skirt again in that nervous gesture I'd learned to recognize over the years. "The money's been transferred, the paperwork is all legal and properly notarized. what's done is done, and there's no point in making a big, dramatic scene about it. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, scrolling through the contacts until I found the number for the local police department. "I'm calling the police," I said, my voice steadier than I felt inside, where everything was falling apart and reshaping itself into something I didn't recognize. "Go ahead," Harper challenged, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty cross her face for the first time since this conversation began. Drag our family through a scandal? Make mom and dad cry more than they already have dealing with their financial problems? Besides, she smiled with the sweetness that had always masked her cruelest moments. "I've already spent most of it on investments and necessary expenses." Maggie placed a steady hand on my arm, her touch grounding me when I felt like I might fly apart from pure fury and heartbreak. "Samantha, wait. Let's think this through carefully before we do anything we can't take back." But I was already dialing, my finger hovering over the call button as Harper's face paled slightly despite her attempts to maintain her composed facade. "Mom and Dad will never forgive you for putting them through this kind of public humiliation," she said quietly, playing what she thought was her trump card. I paused, my finger still hovering over the button that would set everything in motion, because she was right about our parents and the devastating effect this would have on them. They'd already lost so much trying to keep our family financially afloat during Dad's unemployment and Mom's medical bills, and the idea of adding a criminal investigation and media attention to their burdens made my stomach twist with guilt and conflicted loyalty. "You're really going to stand there and blackmail me with our parents' happiness?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as the full scope of Harper's manipulation became clear to me. "I'm being practical." Harper grabbed her purse with movements that were too quick and sharp to be as casual as she was trying to appear. "Something you never learned, Samantha. Face it, you're too soft for the real world, too naive and trusting to survive out there. That money would have been wasted on your little dream projects and idealistic nonsense." Maggie stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades in the architectural industry. "Dreams like this sustainable housing initiative she's been developing, the one that could revolutionize affordable housing in this city and provide homes for thousands of families who can't afford traditional market-rate housing?" Harper faltered for a moment, clearly not expecting anyone to defend my work with such conviction and specific knowledge. But she quickly recovered her composure with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years deflecting criticism and responsibility. "Whatever. What's done is done, and no amount of crying about it is going to change the reality of the situation." My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, and I opened it barely registering the words through the haze of anger and betrayal that was clouding my ability to think clearly. "Get out," I said quietly, my voice carrying a finality that surprised even me. "This is my house too," Harper protested, but her voice lacked the confidence it had carried just moments before. "Get out!" I screamed, my voice raw with emotion and loud enough that I was probably disturbing the neighbors. "You're not my sister anymore. You're just a thief in designer clothes, and I don't want to look at you for another second." Harper's carefully constructed mask cracked slightly, and for just a moment I saw something that might have been regret or fear flickering in her eyes, before it was replaced by the cold determination that had apparently been driving her all along. She walked to the door, pausing only briefly at the threshold. "You'll thank me someday when you learn how the world really works and stop living in your fantasy land of architectural dreams and family loyalty." After Harper left, Maggie read the text message over my shoulder while I collapsed onto the couch that had been our family gathering place for holiday mornings and movie nights, and all the moments that had made this house feel like home before everything fell apart. "You know what they say," Maggie smiled, hugging me goodbye in the driveway where I'd learned to ride a bike and where Harper had taught me to drive stick shift during one of our rare moments of sisterly cooperation. "Success is the best revenge. And tomorrow, you're going to start building the kind of success that Harper could never steal or forge or manipulate away from you." I watched our childhood home fade in my rearview mirror, each mile putting distance between the betrayal that had redefined my understanding of family and loyalty and trust. Caroline had always said that everything happens for a reason, that the universe has a way of balancing accounts even when justice seems impossible, and maybe she was right. Maybe losing my inheritance would lead me to something better, something Harper couldn't steal because it would be built on my own merit and vision rather than family money. The next morning, I stood outside the gleaming glass tower that housed Moreno and Associates, my portfolio clutched in hands that trembled slightly from nerves and anticipation and the lingering adrenaline of everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. This was my chance to prove that Harper was wrong about me, wrong about my abilities and my potential and my capacity to succeed in the real world without family money or connections to smooth the way. The Whitfield Tower will redefine our city's skyline. Isaac Moreno gestured at the blueprint spread across the conference room table, his voice carrying the passion of someone who'd built his firm from nothing and still got excited about projects that could make a real difference. And I want you to lead it, Samantha. This isn't just about designing another office building. This is about creating a sustainable, innovative space that will serve as a model for urban development for decades to come. I tried to keep my hands from shaking as I traced the preliminary sketches, taking in the scope and ambition of what he was proposing. This wasn't just a building, it was a 40-story statement of innovation and sustainability, the kind of project architects dream about, but rarely get the chance to lead, especially not when they're still finishing graduate school and working entry-level positions at small firms. "Why me?" I asked, knowing I had to voice the question, even though I was afraid the answer might make this opportunity disappear as quickly as it had appeared. There must be dozens of more experienced architects who would jump at the chance to lead something this significant. "I've seen your work," Isaac interrupted, his tone suggesting he'd already considered and dismissed any concerns about my experience level. "That sustainable housing concept Maggie showed me last month, that's exactly the kind of fresh perspective and innovative thinking we need for this project. You understand that architecture isn't just about creating beautiful buildings, it's about solving problems and improving people's lives." He leaned forward across the table, his eyes intense with the kind of focused energy that had made him one of the most successful developers in the city. "This is a chance to make history, Samantha. This is your opportunity to design something that will outlast all of us and prove that sustainable architecture isn't just an idealistic dream, but a practical necessity for the future. Are you in?" "Absolutely." The word came out before I could overthink it or second-guess myself or worry about whether I was qualified enough or experienced enough to take on something this ambitious. "Perfect," Isaac stood, straightening his tie with the satisfied air of someone who just made an excellent decision. "Team meeting in 10 minutes. Time to meet your crew and start turning these blueprints into reality." I followed Isaac down the sleek hallway, my heels clicking against marble floors that probably cost more than most people's annual salary, trying to process the surreal shift from yesterday's devastation to today's incredible opportunity. After a sleepless night in my tiny new apartment, surrounded by hastily packed boxes and trying to figure out how I was going to pay rent without my inheritance money, this felt like stepping into someone else's life. The conference room was filled with the kind of people I'd only seen in architecture magazines, experienced professionals with impressive portfolios and expensive suits who looked like they belonged in boardrooms making decisions that affected entire city blocks. I tried to project confidence as Isaac introduced me, even though I felt like an imposter who had somehow wandered into a meeting far above her pay grade. "Everyone, meet your new project lead," Isaac announced with the kind of authority that made it clear this decision was final and not up for debate. "Samantha Cole will be heading up the Whitfield Tower development, and I expect everyone to give her the same level of support and respect you'd give any senior architect." My words died in my throat as my eyes swept the conference table and landed on a face I knew better than my own. There, sitting among the professionals turning to greet me with polite smiles and curious expressions, was Harper. Our eyes met across the conference room, and I watched her perfect composure slip for just a second, showing the same shock and disbelief I felt, before her practiced mask slid back into place. "Samantha," she said smoothly, as if we'd run into each other at a coffee shop rather than in the conference room where I was about to become her boss. "What a surprise to see you here." Isaac looked between us with the kind of curious interest that suggested he was picking up on undercurrents he didn't understand. "You two know each other?" "We've worked together before," I said carefully, before Harper could spin some version of events that would undermine my authority or credibility before I'd even had a chance to establish myself in this role. Two could play at the game of careful professional politeness, and I wasn't going to let her control the narrative this time. The next hour was torture as I introduced myself to the team, outlined my vision for the project, and assigned initial tasks while pretending that my sister was sitting there wearing yet another expensive outfit that had been bought with my stolen money. Every time I made eye contact with Harper, I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how to use this unexpected situation to her advantage or minimize the damage to her own position. When the meeting finally ended and people began filing out to start their assigned tasks, I felt like I had just survived the longest performance of my life. Maggie appeared at my elbow with a grin on her face, been invited to serve as a consulting advisor on the project, and she pulled me into a nearby empty office where I could finally let my professional facade drop for a moment. "You didn't tell me Harper worked here," she said, closing the door behind us and giving me a look that was part concern and part admiration for how I'd handled the surprise. "I didn't know." I collapsed into a chair, suddenly exhausted from the effort of maintaining my composure while my entire world continued to shift and realign around me. "She must have started recently. God, Maggie, what am I going to do? How can I lead a project when my own sister is on the team, especially after what she did to me?" "Your job," she said firmly, her voice carrying the no-nonsense authority that had made her such an effective mentor over the years. "You earned this position based on your talent and vision, not because of family connections or politics. Don't let her take this opportunity away from you, too." A knock at the door made us both jump, and Victoria Langford entered with the kind of confident elegance that marked her as someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. She was our primary client and investor, the woman whose foundation was funding the Whitfield Tower project, and her approval would be crucial to my success in this new role. "Samantha," she smiled warmly, extending a hand that was firm and confident, "Isaac speaks very highly of you. Do you have a moment to discuss the project parameters and timeline?" I followed her to her temporary office, trying to project more confidence than I felt, while my mind raced with thoughts of Harper and inheritance money and the impossible complexity of trying to lead a professional team that included the person who'd betrayed me most deeply. Victoria settled behind her desk, studying me with the kind of sharp intelligence that had built her business empire from nothing. "I'll be direct," she said, her tone suggesting she didn't waste time on pleasantries or small talk when business was involved. "This project means everything to my foundation's mission of sustainable urban development. We're investing $30 million based on Isaac's recommendation and your innovative approach to eco-friendly architecture." The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a physical burden, because $30 million represented more money than I could properly comprehend, and the kind of professional pressure I'd never faced before. "I understand the scope of what we're undertaking," I said, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "This project will serve as a model for sustainable development that other cities can adapt and replicate." "Exactly," Victoria leaned forward, her eyes bright with the kind of passionate intensity that had made her one of the most successful businesswomen in the state. "But I need to know that you can handle the politics and interpersonal dynamics that come with managing a large, diverse team. Leadership isn't just about having good ideas. It's about implementing those ideas while managing personalities and conflicts and competing agendas." I thought about Harper sitting in that conference room, about the years of manipulation and competition that had led to yesterday's betrayal, about the challenge of working with someone who'd proven they couldn't be trusted with family loyalty, much less professional integrity. "I can handle whatever challenges arise," I said, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. "I've been dealing with difficult personalities and complex dynamics my entire life." "Good," she smiled, and I could see that I'd passed some kind of test. Because this project is going to test every leadership skill you have, and failure isn't an option. Too many people are counting on us to succeed. As I walked back to my new office, my office with my name on the door and a view of the city I was about to help reshape, I thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought me here. Yesterday, I'd lost my inheritance and my sister. Today, I'd gained a career-defining opportunity and the chance to prove that success couldn't be stolen or forged, only earned through talent and determination and the willingness to rise above betrayal. The first week of leading the Whitfield Tower project felt like navigating a minefield while pretending to be on a casual stroll. Every interaction with my team requiring careful calculation to maintain my authority while avoiding the explosive tension that Harper's presence created in every meeting. She sat through my presentations with the kind of polite attention that looked professional to everyone else, but felt like mockery to me, taking notes and asking questions that seemed designed to test my knowledge rather than genuinely contribute to the project's success. Samantha's sustainability metrics are interesting, Harper said during our third team meeting, her voice carrying just enough subtle skepticism to plant doubt without seeming openly confrontational. But I wonder if we've considered the cost implications of some of these eco-friendly materials. Victoria's foundation is generous, but we still need to stay within budget parameters. I felt the familiar surge of anger that came with Harper's passive-aggressive challenges, but I'd learned to channel that emotion into professional composure over the past few days. The initial investment in sustainable materials will be offset by long-term savings in energy costs and maintenance, I replied smoothly, pulling up the financial projections I'd prepared for exactly this kind of questioning. Over the building's lifespan, we'll actually save money while reducing environmental impact. Ethan Rhodes, the marketing specialist who'd been assigned to handle the project's public relations, looked between us with the kind of uncomfortable awareness that suggested he was picking up on undercurrents he didn't fully understand. I'd noticed him watching our interactions with growing curiosity, and something in his expression suggested he might be starting to piece together personal dynamics affecting our professional relationship. After the meeting, Ethan lingered while the rest of the team filed out to begin their assigned tasks. "Samantha," he said quietly, glancing toward the door where Harper had just exited, "can I ask you something? Harper mentioned you two have worked together before, but there seems to be some tension there. Is there anything I should know about that might affect the project?" The question put me in an impossible position because acknowledging the personal conflict would undermine my professional credibility. But ignoring it completely might leave Ethan vulnerable to Harper's manipulation if she decided to use him as an ally against me. "Harper and I have a complicated history," I said carefully. "But I'm committed to keeping personal issues separate from our work here. This project is too important to let interpersonal dynamics interfere with our success." "I appreciate that," Ethan said, his expression suggesting he respected my attempt to maintain professionalism even while recognizing there was more to the story. "Harper's been here for about 6 months, and she's good at her job, but sometimes I get the feeling she's not entirely straightforward about her motivations. I just wanted you to know that if you need someone on the team who's focused purely on the project's success, you can count on me." The offer of support was unexpected and deeply appreciated because I'd been feeling increasingly isolated, trying to lead a team that included someone actively working to undermine my authority. "Thank you, Ethan. That means more than you know." That afternoon, Maggie knocked on my office door with the kind of purposeful expression that suggested she had important news to share. "I've been doing some research on Harper's employment history," she said, closing the door behind her and settling into the chair across from my desk. "There are some things you should know about how she ended up on this team." "What kind of things?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "She applied for this position the day after Aunt Caroline's will was read," Maggie said, her voice carrying the weight of someone delivering unwelcome but necessary information. "Her resume includes some embellishments about her experience with sustainable architecture projects, and she specifically mentioned having inside knowledge about innovative, eco-friendly design concepts." The implication hit me like a physical blow, because it meant Harper hadn't just stolen my inheritance. She'd used knowledge of my work to secure a position on the very team I'd been chosen to lead. "She plagiarized my portfolio," I said quietly, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. The sustainable housing initiative, the green building techniques I'd been developing, she presented them as her own work to get this job. "It appears that way," Maggie confirmed. "Isaac hired her based partly on her claimed expertise in areas that are actually your specialties. She's been positioning herself as the team's sustainability expert while you were still finishing school and working other jobs." The revelation added a new layer of betrayal to everything Harper had already done, because it meant her theft hadn't been limited to money. She'd stolen my ideas, my innovations, my professional identity, and used them to build her own career while leaving me to start over from nothing.
The scope of her deception was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. "There's more," Maggie continued, her expression growing more serious. "Victoria Langford has been asking questions about the team's sustainability expertise, and Harper has been positioning herself as the primary source of eco-friendly innovation for the project. She's been taking credit for concepts that are clearly based on your work." The confrontation I'd been dreading came during our team's presentation to Victoria Langford and the Foundation's board of directors, a crucial meeting that would determine whether our project proposal would receive final approval and full funding. I'd spent weeks preparing a comprehensive presentation that showcased our innovative approach to sustainable architecture, only to watch Harper subtly insert herself into every aspect of the discussion. "The green roof system we're proposing," Harper said smoothly during my presentation, stepping forward to point at the architectural renderings, "builds on some preliminary concepts I've been developing for urban agriculture integration. The idea is to create a self-sustaining ecosystem that provides both environmental benefits and food production capabilities." I felt my hands clench into fists as I recognized my own ideas being presented with Harper's confident authority. The months of research and development I had poured into sustainable urban farming concepts being claimed as her innovation. Victoria leaned forward with obvious interest, clearly impressed by what she thought was Harper's expertise. "That's fascinating, Harper," Victoria said, making notes on her tablet. "How did you develop this approach? It seems quite advanced for traditional architecture firms." "I've been working on sustainable design integration for several years," Harper replied without hesitation, her voice carrying the perfect balance of humility and confidence that made her lies sound like modest understatement. "The key is understanding that modern architecture needs to be more than just aesthetically pleasing. It needs to actively contribute to environmental restoration and community self-sufficiency." The words were almost verbatim from a paper I'd written for my graduate thesis, concepts I'd developed through months of research and experimentation that Harper was now presenting as her breakthrough thinking. I could see Ethan looking between us with growing awareness that something was seriously wrong with this dynamic. "Actually," I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt inside, where everything was burning with rage and determination, "those concepts originated from research I conducted for my graduate program. Harper has been helping me refine the implementation details, but the core innovation comes from my thesis work on sustainable urban agriculture." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Harper's confident expression flickered with uncertainty for the first time since I'd known her. Victoria looked between us with the sharp intelligence that had built her business empire, clearly sensing undercurrents that went beyond normal professional collaboration. "I see," Victoria said slowly, her tone suggesting she was filing away this information for future consideration. "And Samantha, you're the project lead, so these sustainability innovations are part of your overall vision for the Whitfield Tower?" "Exactly," I said, meeting Victoria's gaze directly while feeling Harper's angry stare boring into the side of my head. "The sustainable agriculture system is just one component of a comprehensive approach to eco-friendly urban development that I've been developing for the past 3 years." The rest of the presentation continued with attention that was palpable to everyone in the room, though I maintained my professional composure while Harper struggled to recover from being publicly corrected about her role in the project's development. When we finally finished and the board members filed out to deliberate, Harper cornered me in the hallway with an expression I'd never seen before, pure, undisguised fury. "How dare you undermine me in front of Victoria?" she hissed, her carefully maintained facade finally cracking to reveal the anger and desperation underneath. "I've been working on this team for months, building relationships and establishing my credibility, and you waltz in here and try to destroy everything I've accomplished." "Everything you've stolen, you mean?" I replied quietly, conscious that we were still in a professional environment where our conversation could be overheard. "Prove it," Harper challenged, but her voice lacked the confidence it had carried during the presentation. You have no evidence, no way to demonstrate that those concepts originated with you rather than being collaborative work we developed together. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by 3 years' worth of research files, academic papers, and development sketches that documented every stage of my work on sustainable architecture concepts. Maggie had helped me organize the evidence into a comprehensive timeline that clearly showed the evolution of ideas Harper had claimed as her own, and the pattern of intellectual theft was undeniable when laid out chronologically. "This is damning," Ethan said, reviewing the documents I'd decided to share with him after his offer of support proved genuine. "These sketches are dated 2 years before Harper even applied to work here, and your academic advisor's notes clearly establish your authorship of the core concepts." "The question is what to do with this information," Maggie said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd navigated corporate politics for decades. "We could present it to Isaac and Victoria, but that might make you look vindictive or unprofessional for bringing family drama into the workplace." I stared at the evidence spread across my coffee table. Years of my intellectual work that Harper had stolen and repackaged as her own innovation. "She's not going to stop," I said finally. "This isn't just about taking credit for past work. She's actively trying to position herself as the project's sustainability expert, so she can claim credit for everything we accomplish going forward." "Then we need to be strategic about how we handle this," Ethan said, his marketing background evident in his approach to the problem. "Instead of making accusations, we present your documentation as part of the project's development history. Let the evidence speak for itself without making it look like a personal attack." The next morning brought an email from Victoria requesting a private meeting to discuss the project's sustainability components in more detail. When I arrived at her office, I found her reviewing notes from yesterday's presentation with the kind of focused attention that suggested she'd been thinking about our team dynamics overnight. "Samantha," she said without preamble, "I need to understand the development history of these sustainability concepts. Yesterday's presentation raised some questions about authorship and intellectual property that need to be clarified before we proceed." I pulled out the carefully organized portfolio of documentation that Maggie and I had prepared, laying out the timeline of research and development that clearly established my role in creating the innovations Harper had tried to claim. "These concepts emerged from my graduate thesis work," I explained, walking Victoria through the evidence with professional calm. "I can provide academic records, advisor correspondence, and dated development sketches that show the evolution of these ideas over the past 3 years." Victoria reviewed the documentation with the thoroughness of someone accustomed to due diligence in high-stakes investments. "This is quite impressive work," she said finally, "and it raises serious questions about Harper's representation of her contributions to the project." "I don't want to create unnecessary conflict within the team," I said carefully, "but I also can't allow my work to be misrepresented or my leadership to be undermined by false claims of expertise." "Of course not." Victoria closed the portfolio with a decisive motion. "Intellectual property integrity is crucial for this foundation's projects. I'll be scheduling individual meetings with all team members to clarify their specific roles and contributions going forward." As I walked back to my office, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness, because exposing Harper's lies meant acknowledging that the sister I'd once loved and trusted had
Become someone capable of stealing not just money, but ideas, dreams, and professional identity. The evidence would protect my work and establish my authority, but it couldn't restore the relationship that Harper's betrayals had destroyed beyond any possibility of repair. The war between us was no longer just personal. It had become professional, and in that arena, truth and documentation would determine the victor rather than family loyalty or emotional manipulation. Harper had chosen this battlefield when she decided to steal my work along with my inheritance, and now she would face the consequences of attacking someone who had finally learned to fight back with facts instead of forgiveness.
Victoria's individual meetings with team members created an atmosphere of tension that permeated the entire office for the following week, as everyone knew that major decisions about the project's future were being made behind closed doors. I watched Harper's confident facade begin to crack as she realized that her carefully constructed narrative was being examined under the kind of scrutiny that exposed lies and revealed uncomfortable truths about professional integrity and intellectual property theft. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a routine project review meeting, when Victoria announced that she had completed her investigation into the team's contributions and would be making some significant changes to personnel assignments based on her findings. Harper sat rigid in her chair, her usual polished composure replaced by barely controlled anxiety as Victoria opened the folder that contained her conclusions. After reviewing documentation and conducting individual interviews, Victoria began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected entire careers. I've identified some discrepancies in how certain team members have represented their expertise and contributions to this project. The room fell silent, except for the sound of papers rustling as Victoria consulted her notes, and I could see Harper's hands trembling slightly as she gripped her pen with white-knuckled intensity. Ethan caught my eye across the table, his expression conveying both support and anticipation for what was about to unfold. "Harper," Victoria continued, her tone shifting to the kind of professional coldness that preceded termination conversations, "your claimed expertise in sustainable architecture appears to be based on work that was actually developed by other team members. The documentation clearly shows that the concepts you presented as your own innovations originated from Samantha's graduate research and thesis work." Harper's face flushed red as the accusation hung in the air like an indictment, and for a moment she seemed to shrink in her chair before her defensive anger took over. "That's completely unfair," she said, her voice rising with the kind of desperation that comes from being cornered with nowhere to retreat. "Samantha and I have collaborated on these concepts for years, and it's impossible to separate individual contributions when ideas develop through family discussions and shared brainstorming." "Family discussions?" Victoria raised an eyebrow with the kind of sharp interest that suggested Harper had just revealed more than she intended. "You're related to Samantha? That wasn't mentioned in either of your employment files or during the interview process." I felt the weight of everyone's attention shift to me as the personal dimension of our conflict was suddenly exposed in the most professional setting possible. "Harper is my sister," I said quietly, knowing that there was no point in trying to hide the relationship now that Harper had revealed it herself. "We haven't disclosed the family connection because we've been committed to maintaining professional boundaries and avoiding any appearance of favoritism or conflict of interest." "Professional boundaries?" Harper laughed bitterly, her composure completely shattered now that her lies were being exposed in front of the entire team. "Is that what you call stealing my job and trying to ruin my career? You've been plotting against me since the day you walked into this office, using your new position to settle personal grudges." The accusation was so audacious and so completely divorced from reality that it left me speechless for a moment, because Harper was essentially claiming that I had orchestrated my own hiring to persecute her rather than acknowledging that her own theft and deception had created this situation. Victoria's expression shifted to one of cold assessment as she processed this new information about our family dynamics. "Let me understand this correctly," Victoria said, her voice carrying the kind of dangerous calm that preceded devastating revelations. "You're suggesting that Samantha somehow manipulated Isaac to hire her for a position she was uniquely qualified for, all as part of a conspiracy to damage your career? And this conspiracy would have required her to somehow predict that you would plagiarize her work to secure your own position here?" Harper's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound as she realized that her defensive accusations had only made her situation worse by revealing the paranoid thinking and victim mentality that had driven her increasingly desperate behavior. Ethan was staring at her with obvious disgust, while other team members exchanged glances that suggested they were finally understanding the toxic dynamics that had been affecting our project. The truth is simpler and more disturbing, Victoria continued, consulting her folder again. Harper secured her position here by misrepresenting her qualifications and claiming expertise in areas where she had no original contribution. She then attempted to take credit for Samantha's innovations while undermining her sister's leadership through passive-aggressive behavior and false claims of collaboration. What followed was the most thorough professional destruction I had ever witnessed, as Victoria methodically dismantled every aspect of Harper's carefully constructed professional identity with the precision of someone who had built her career on separating truth from fiction in high-stakes business environments. The documentation I had provided became evidence in what felt like a
Courtroom proceeding with Harper's lies exposed one by one until there was nothing left of her credibility. Your resume claims 3 years of experience with sustainable architecture projects, Victoria read from her notes. But the companies you listed have no record of you working on any eco-friendly initiatives. In fact, 2 of them confirmed that you were employed in basic administrative roles with no involvement in design or development work. Harper's face had gone completely white as the scope of her deception was revealed to the entire team, her professional reputation crumbling in real time as Victoria continued reading from what was clearly a comprehensive investigation into her background and qualifications. I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness watching my sister's world collapse. Because despite everything she had done to me, seeing someone I had once loved facing such complete humiliation was genuinely painful. Furthermore, Victoria continued, your financial record shows suspicious deposits that coincide exactly with the timeline of Samantha's missing inheritance, suggesting that your recent lifestyle improvements were funded through means that have nothing to do with your legitimate employment income. The inheritance money. Victoria had somehow traced Harper's spending patterns and connected them to the theft that had started this entire nightmare, adding financial fraud to the growing list of ethical violations that had defined my sister's recent behavior. I could see panic replacing anger in Harper's expression as she realized that the consequences of her actions were expanding far beyond losing a job. This investigation has revealed a pattern of deception that extends well beyond professional misrepresentation, Victoria said, closing her folder with finality. The Foundation takes intellectual property theft very seriously, and we will be referring this matter to legal counsel for potential civil action to recover damages and protect our investment in legitimate innovation. Harper finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. You can't do this to me. I have rights. I have a contract. I have protections against wrongful termination. You have protections against legitimate wrongful termination, Victoria corrected. You don't have protections against termination for cause related to fraud, misrepresentation, and intellectual property theft. Your employment contract includes specific clauses about honesty and integrity that you violated from the day you were hired. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice carrying the kind of moral authority that comes from witnessing injustice and choosing to speak up. I think everyone on this team deserves to know that Harper has been actively working to undermine Samantha's leadership through gossip and false claims about her qualifications. She's been trying to turn team members against our project lead while taking credit for innovations that clearly belong to someone else. The revelation that Harper's sabotage had extended beyond passive aggression into active campaign against my leadership added another layer to her professional misconduct, and I could see team members looking at her with combinations of disgust and disbelief. The sister who had once charmed everyone with her charisma and confidence had revealed herself to be someone capable of betraying anyone if it served her ambitions. Pack your office, Victoria said, standing to signal that the meeting was over. Security will escort you from the building, and you'll receive final paperwork regarding your termination and the legal proceedings that will follow. Your behavior has been unprofessional, unethical, and potentially criminal. As Harper gathered her things with shaking hands, she looked at me with an expression of pure hatred that erased any lingering sadness I felt about her downfall. This isn't over, Samantha, she said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of venom that revealed how completely our relationship had been poisoned by her choices.
You think you've won, but you have no idea what you have done to our family." "I didn't do anything to our family," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil of watching my sister's complete professional destruction. "You destroyed our family when you chose money and ambition over loyalty and love. This is just the consequence of choices you made long before I ever walked into this office." The days following Harper's termination felt like recovering from a natural disaster, emotionally exhausting but also strangely liberating, as the constant tension and underlying conflict that had poisoned every team interaction finally disappeared. The Whitfield-Cower project moved forward with efficiency and collaboration that I had never experienced while Harper was actively working to undermine my authority and claim credit for my innovations. Victoria scheduled a private meeting with me the week after Harper's departure, and her office felt different now that the investigation was complete and the truth had been fully revealed. She gestured for me to sit across from her desk, her expression carrying the kind of respect that comes from witnessing someone handle an impossible situation with grace and professionalism. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble, her directness refreshing after weeks of navigating Harper's manipulation and deception. "I should have caught the discrepancies in Harper's qualifications during the initial hiring process, and I should have recognized the intellectual property issues sooner when she started taking credit for your work." "You couldn't have known about the family dynamics," I replied, though I appreciated her acknowledgement of the situation's complexity. "Harper has always been skilled at presenting herself in whatever way serves her purposes, and she's had years to perfect the art of taking credit for other people's accomplishments." "The legal proceedings are moving forward," Victoria continued, consulting notes on her tablet. "We're pursuing civil action for intellectual property theft and fraud, and the evidence you provided has been invaluable."
Provided has been instrumental in building a case that should result in significant financial penalties and permanent damage to her professional reputation. The mention of legal consequences brought up complicated feelings about watching my sister face prosecution for crimes that were undeniably real, but still felt surreal when applied to someone I had once trusted completely. "What does that mean for our family?" I asked, voicing the concern that had been weighing on me since Harper's termination. "That depends on how your family chooses to handle the truth about Harper's behavior," Victoria said gently. "The legal case will be public record, and the evidence of her theft and deception will be documented in court filings that anyone can access. She won't be able to maintain the fiction that this was just a family misunderstanding or professional disagreement." I thought about my parents, who had always struggled to see Harper's flaws clearly and would undoubtedly be devastated to learn the full scope of her betrayals. The inheritance theft would be painful enough, but the professional misconduct and systematic deception would shatter their image of the daughter they had always favored and protected from consequences. "There's something else," Victoria said, her tone shifting to something that sounded almost excited. "The Foundation Board has been so impressed with your handling of this situation and your innovative approach to sustainable architecture that we're prepared to offer you a permanent position as our Director of Sustainable Development. It would mean leading projects across multiple cities and having a budget of over $50 million for eco-friendly urban initiatives." The offer was so far beyond anything I had imagined possible just a few months ago that I needed a moment to process the magnitude of what she was proposing. Director of Sustainable Development for one of the largest foundations in the region, with the resources and authority to implement the kind of large-scale environmental projects I had only dreamed about during my graduate studies. "The irony isn't lost on me," I said finally, thinking about the journey that had brought me from losing my inheritance to gaining a career opportunity that Harper could never have achieved through theft or deception. If Harper hadn't stolen my inheritance money, I probably never would have been desperate enough to take risks that led me to this position. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead us to the best opportunities. Victoria smiled, extending her hand across the desk. "Harper tried to steal your ideas and your inheritance, but she couldn't steal your talent or your integrity. Those are the qualities that earned you this position, and they're the qualities that will make you successful in whatever you choose to do next." As I walked back to my office, my permanent office, with a view of the city I would now help reshape through multiple sustainable development projects, I thought about the strange mathematics of justice and karma. Harper took $300,000 from me, but her theft had indirectly led me to opportunities worth millions and a career trajectory that would have been impossible if I had remained comfortable and complacent with inherited money. The inheritance I had lost was nothing compared to the future I had gained through my own merit and the relationships I had built with people who valued honesty and innovation over manipulation and theft. Harper's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating in ways she could never understand because it had forced me to discover my own strength and worth independent of family money or approval. 6 months after Harper's termination and the completion of the Whitfield Towers groundbreaking ceremony, I stood on the building's future site watching construction crews break ground on what would become the most sustainable high-rise development in the city's history. The morning sun cast long shadows across the construction site where my designs were finally becoming reality, each steel beam and concrete foundation representing years of dreaming and planning that no one could steal or forge or claim as their own. The legal proceedings against Harper had concluded the week before with a settlement that required her to pay restitution for the stolen inheritance, plus damages for intellectual property theft and professional fraud. The final amount was more than the original $300,000 she had taken, but the money felt less important now than the principle that actions have consequences and that theft, whether personal or professional, would not go unpunished or unacknowledged. "She's been calling Mom and Dad every day," I told Maggie as we reviewed the latest construction progress reports from my new office downtown, where I now oversaw sustainable development projects across 3 states for Victoria's Foundation. Maggie looked up from the blueprint she was reviewing with the kind of concerned expression that had become familiar over the months since Harper's world had collapsed. "How are your parents handling the truth about what she did?" The question touched on the most complicated aspect of Harper's betrayal, because my parents had spent their entire lives protecting and enabling her behavior while expecting me to be understanding and forgiving whenever her actions caused problems for our family. Learning that their favorite daughter had committed fraud and theft had shattered their worldview in ways that were still reverberating through our family dynamics. Dad finally understands why I couldn't just let it go. I remembered the painful conversation we had when the court documents became public record, and he could no longer pretend that Harper's crimes were just family drama blown out of proportion. He called to apologize for not believing me when I first told them about the inheritance theft, and he admitted that they'd been enabling Harper's behavior for years by always bailing her out of trouble. The acknowledgement from my father had meant more than the financial restitution or professional vindication, because it represented a fundamental shift in how my family understood the dynamics that had shaped our relationships for decades. Harper's theft hadn't just damaged her victims, it had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about favoritism and accountability, and the difference between protecting someone and enabling their destructive behavior. "And your mother?" Maggie asked, gently, knowing that my relationship with Mom had always been more complicated because of her tendency to prioritize family harmony over individual justice. "She's struggling," I admitted, thinking about the last conversation we'd had where Mom had alternated between expressing pride in my success and guilt about not protecting me from Harper's manipulations. "She keeps saying that she failed as a mother because she raised one daughter who would steal from the other, but she also keeps hoping that Harper will somehow redeem herself and that we can all be a family again." The fantasy of family reconciliation was something I'd had to let go of during the months of legal proceedings and professional rebuilding, because Harper's response to being held accountable had been to double down on victimhood and blame, rather than acknowledging her choices and their consequences. The sister I had once loved no longer existed, replaced by someone whose sense of entitlement and grievance had consumed any capacity for genuine remorse or growth. "Have you heard from Harper directly?" Maggie asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Just once," I said, remembering the voicemail Harper had left after the settlement was finalized, her voice alternating between rage and self-pity as she blamed me for destroying her life and ruining her future prospects. "She's working as a receptionist at a dental office in another state, living with a roommate she found on Craigslist, and apparently still convinced that none of this is her fault."
The image of Harper reduced to entry-level employment after years of manipulation and theft should have brought me satisfaction, but instead it filled me with a complex sadness about wasted potential and choices that could never be unmade. The Harper who had built pillow forts with me and promised we'd always be best friends had possessed real intelligence and charm that could have built a legitimate career if she hadn't chosen shortcuts and deception instead. A knock on my office door interrupted my reflection, and Ethan entered with the kind of excited energy that usually meant good news about one of our projects. Over the months since Harper's departure, he had become not just a valued colleague, but a genuine friend whose integrity and humor had helped me navigate the transition from project leader to regional director. The sustainability metrics from the Whitfield Tower are exceeding every projection. Energy efficiency is 20% higher than estimated, water consumption is down 30%, and the urban agriculture systems are producing enough food to supply the building's cafeteria plus 3 local food banks. The success of our flagship project represented validation of everything I had worked toward during my graduate studies, and the innovations Harper had tried to steal and claim as her own. But more than personal vindication, it proved that sustainable architecture wasn't just idealistic dreaming, but practical necessity that could transform how cities approach development and environmental responsibility. Victoria wants to feature the project in a documentary about innovative urban development, and she's asked if you'd be willing to be interviewed about the design process and the broader implications for sustainable city planning. The opportunity to share my work with a national audience represented the kind of platform I could never have imagined achieving if Harper's theft hadn't forced me out of my comfortable assumptions about family and career and pushed me toward risks and opportunities I might never have pursued otherwise. The documentary would cement my reputation as a leader in sustainable architecture while providing a platform to advocate for environmental responsibility and urban planning. There's something else, Ethan said, his expression shifting to something more personal. Harper's been contacting some of our former colleagues, trying to get them to provide character references for job applications. She's apparently telling people that her termination was the result of family conflict rather than professional misconduct, and she's asking for help rebuilding her reputation. The news that Harper was still trying to manipulate narratives and avoid accountability didn't surprise me, but it reinforced my understanding that some people never learn from consequences because they never accept responsibility for their actions in the first place. Harper's response to losing everything had been to blame others rather than examine her own choices, ensuring that she would likely repeat similar patterns whenever opportunity arose. "Let them know about the court records," I said simply. "The legal documents speak for themselves, and anyone considering hiring her deserves to know the truth about her professional conduct and personal integrity." That evening, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out at the city skyline that now included the rising framework of the Whitfield Tower, its sustainable design elements already visible in the solar panel arrays and green roof systems that would make it a model for environmentally responsible development. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and for a moment I wondered if Harper had found a way to contact me despite my efforts to maintain no contact during the legal proceedings. But the message was from a journalist working on a story about women.
Sustainable architecture, asking if I would be willing to discuss my career trajectory and the challenges of implementing environmental innovations in traditional development markets. The interview request represented another opportunity to share my work and advocate for the kind of systemic changes that could transform how cities approached growth and environmental responsibility. Each platform and opportunity that came my way felt like validation that talent and persistence would ultimately triumph over theft and manipulation. That building something real would always be more satisfying than stealing something temporary. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about Aunt Caroline and the inheritance that had started this entire journey. She had always believed that everything happens for a reason, that setbacks and challenges were often disguised opportunities for growth and discovery.
If she had known that leaving me that money would lead Harper to reveal her true character while pushing me toward opportunities I never could have imagined, I suspected she would have been satisfied with the outcome. The $300,000 Harper had stolen represented one kind of inheritance, money that could be spent or lost or stolen. But the career I had built through my own merit, the innovations I had developed through my own research, the reputation I had earned through my own integrity, those represented a different kind of inheritance, one that belonged to me permanently because it was built on foundations that no one could undermine or steal. Harper had taught me that family loyalty meant nothing without mutual respect and trust, that forgiveness was meaningless without accountability, and that sometimes the people who hurt us most deeply do us the greatest favor by forcing us to discover our own strength. The inheritance she had stolen had been replaced by something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that I could build my own future without depending on anyone else's money or approval or validation. The Whitfield Tower would stand for decades as proof that sustainable development was possible and profitable, but more importantly, it would stand as proof that some things could only be achieved through genuine talent and persistent effort rather than theft and manipulation. Harper had tried to steal my dreams along with my inheritance, but she had failed to understand that dreams, unlike money, grow stronger when they're challenged and become more valuable when they're earned rather than inherited. Looking out at the city I was helping to transform, I realized that the best revenge wasn't Harper's professional destruction or legal consequences. It was building something so successful and meaningful that her theft became irrelevant compared to what I had achieved through my own merit. She had taken $300,000 from me, but in doing so, she had given me something worth far more, the absolute certainty that I could succeed on my own terms, without inheritance money or family approval, through nothing more than talent, integrity, and the willingness to work harder than anyone who tried to steal from me.